That's another thing. You have to be okay with not knowing or understanding what you're reading in documentation. Sometimes you'll understand all of it. Sometimes you'll be like, what? Hey everyone, Shawnee here. So thank you again for stopping by to see what I am up to this week. So if you weren't here last week, you probably missed my little spiel about how much I love test-driven development. So if you wanted to view that, and I highly recommend you do, especially if you are new to coding or you've been coding for a while and you've not really dived into test-driven development or unit testing, I think it's a really good thing to get into or to learn, and I'll explain why it is and why I use it and why I love it so much. If you want to view that, go ahead and click the little link. Like I've said plenty of times in every video, I'm like, I don't know what to talk about this week, and typically I don't. It's like I get to the end of the week and I know I have to do a video, and then I just have to pull something out of my hat. So this week is kind of one of those things. To be honest, when I first started coding, and started to learn programming, I did a lot of tutorials. And yes, you do a lot of tutorials and then you think you know something, and then you try to do it, and then sometimes it fails. A lot of times it does fail. And then say if you want to do something similar to the tutorial that you found, and you want to make it a little bit more extensive. But then you come across a roadblock of, okay, well, how do I implement that? It wasn't in the tutorial. How am I going to do that if it's not in the tutorial? I'm going to share with you my strategy for learning something entirely new from scratch and how I use tutorials to figure it out and to learn more about whatever I'm trying to implement. So if you are a seasoned developer, feel free to critique my process, or maybe add some tips down below in the comments section. That's always helpful. So when I learn something new, when I want to tackle something, really all I do is just open up my favorite search engine, which in my opinion is DuckDuckGo, but I just do a quick search. So for example, I need to implement in-app purchases in my application. I've never done it before. So I'm just going to type in-app purchases, tutorial, some verbiage like that. And then I just look for ones that seem interesting. I click on the first link, the second link, whatever. I just look at the actual tutorial. I see how extensive it is. And then if I feel like, okay, this might answer my question, I take note of the site, copy it down, put in a list. Now I might only come across 1 or 2 tutorials. Sometimes I might come across 5 that I might find interesting. I don't try to say, okay, well, just because this tutorial came up on top, it's the best one. In some cases it's not, I've found. So I will usually just do a list, and then kind of, before I add the actual website tutorial, before I actually add the tutorial to my list, I will typically graze through the whole entire tutorial, looking at how they're implementing things, if they have really good explanations, images. I definitely look for images, because sometimes, especially with implementing something so extensive, like say in-app purchases, you have to do a lot of different steps, and some of those steps are not even in Xcode. What do I need to be aware of? So once I find my 1 to 5 tutorials that I think would be really helpful for me, I will then go to the source. Now, if you're new to programming, you have to be pretty comfortable and okay with documentation. Start early, start it now, be okay with it. Now, you're not going to understand everything in the actual documentation. I don't at all sometimes, but I go in there anyway and read the explanation that, say, Apple gives me for in-app purchases. I read through it. I actually have a notepad or piece of paper, or scratch paper, and if I come across something I've never seen before, I have no idea what it is, I will write it down. so that I know that I need to maybe look into that more, or maybe see if the tutorial actually covers that thing that I have no idea what it is. And so that's another thing. You have to be okay with not knowing or understanding what you're reading in documentation. Sometimes you'll understand all of it. Sometimes you'll be like, what? Be okay with it. That's the thing. It's like when you're learning something new, you have to be okay with it. Be okay. Be one with your dumbness. I go ahead and look at the feature. What does Apple, how do they say it's supposed to be done? What are the best practices? If I come across like a method or a framework that they mention that I have no clue about, I write it down. And then I also try to see if there's something that I need to learn that isn't related to that particular platform. So for example, in-app purchases, one thing that I need to learn is XML. And so I wrote that down. Need to learn XML because it's kind of important if you are, creating a product that has data that isn't just an image. So you have to explain what that data is. So I know now that I will also need to dive in and learn some XML. All right, so I've gotten my preliminary dry run of my tutorial, and then also reading some of the documentation and kind of getting a gist of how it's supposed to be implemented, things like that. So I'll just go ahead and start from there. Just do the tutorial, go through it entirely. And typically what I do is, and I recommend doing this, especially if you're new to something and you're like, don't know how to do it, write instructions for yourself, write a recipe for yourself in your own words, so that when you implement, you use your notes, okay? And that's really important, especially if you're learning something new. It's really important if you want to integrate that knowledge into your brain, actually be able to use it. You need to do the notes in your own words. So that's what I do. It takes me a while to get through the tutorial, because as I'm doing it, as I'm coding, I also take a break and write down what I observed. Say if it's a slightly older tutorial, sometimes the code might be slightly different, like the syntax might be a little different. So I write down any differences that I see, even things like something that I forgot as I was following it. Maybe I forgot a part of the step, or maybe the way that I did it, I came across an error. So I make sure I write down, don't do this, or do this so that this won't happen. After I'm done with the tutorial, what I will also do is I will go back to the documentation, and I will look at the methods, the classes, whatever I wrote down, my original preview of the documentation, and see if I can fill in any holes that I'm missing. Or if what I want to do wasn't in the tutorial, I will go back into the documentation and see, okay, how can I implement this? Now, if I can't find that information from the documentation, or I can't figure it out, that's what you have your search engine for. And Stack Overflow, okay? Yeah, because Stack Overflow, will get you through it. But I think it's important, though, to actually do a tutorial before you jump into Stack Overflow, because once you get your feet wet in whatever you're trying to do, when you go to Stack Overflow, you can look at some of the questions other people have, posted, and then the answers you'll be able to understand, because the important part is understanding the code that you're coding and not just copying and pasting. So that's why I recommend first doing a tutorial, get your notes down, get your feet wet, then go to Stack Overflow for any of those things that you can't figure out on your own, or that you can't figure out from the actual documentation. Sometimes the documentation is really great at explaining how to implement something. For example, when I was dealing with regular expressions, the documentation Apple's documentation was pretty flippin' awesome. Like, I really didn't need to go outside of try to find information. It literally had, okay, this is how you implement this type of layout or to get this result from, the regular expression class. So sometimes it's really great. Sometimes you're just like, okay, thanks, Apple, that was helpful. And then once you're completely finished, you have a really good handle on what you're trying to do, then you implement it into your application. All right, so that's one of the things that I figured out for myself that works for me is to do this strategy, because every time I've done this strategy, it has helped me out so many times. And when I do implement it into my actual application, I don't go off the tutorial. I actually go off my notes. And once I go off my notes, I know pretty much, majority of the time, I get it right the first time, which is awesome. But it's because I did all these setup first before I actually dived in and tried to implement it. So that's my tip for today. If you found this video informative, give it a thumbs up. Yeah. If you like what I do and you want to know or be notified when I upload something new, you have to subscribe and hit the bell below. All right, so I guess till next time, friends.